Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. It's a chilly 5:30 p.m. here in Chicago. It's a cold day. You can see that I'm turning blue. This is that awkward time of the year where my wife has shut the boiler off, and we're waiting for it to warm up a little. So it was like 67 in here today. Ooh, freezing cold. So today we're going to be going endlessly, incessantly babbling about the BBE sonic maximizer, also known as the Aphex Oral Exciter. So this was a phenomenon. This was something that it came in and it was a big thing. It was just like the use of gated reverb on the snare, on the drums. In the 80s, we had production techniques that had crept into our studio and become gospel. Nothing escaped the hooks of the BBE Sonic Maximizer or the Aphex Oral Exciter. And while the technology was mystified because the manufacturers did not let the cat out of the bag, they did everything they could to protect their intellectual property. It was not a commercially available product. You had to rent it. This equipment was leased to the world's recording studios, and it was used in the mastering process. So we have these recordings exist from the 80s, and if you have a good ear, you'll be able to tell right away if this was used in the mastering process, because it's got that fairy dust. So what does it do? Well, that's the source of a lot of debate. And again, the manufacturers of these PCBs or the circuit boards was trying to protect our intellectual property. And how you do that is a process which has become known as gooping. So goop is a black epoxy that is applied to the component side of a printed circuit board. So where the resistors, the transistors, capacitors, integrated circuits, and transformers may be, it is covered with a thick black epoxy, which dries hard. And this prevents anyone from being able to see the components. Typically, when a new circuit hits the consumer audio market, immediately the DIY crowd will get in there, take it apart, and start sketching out all the part values and then the circuit. So they can basically do a one-to-one clone. They can make this. And I know that sounds crazy, like who has all that time in their hands? The DIY community. Those guys are awesome, and they do this. So in order to try to protect their intellectual property, one of the things that these corporations did was goop the PCBs. The other thing they did was they had a whole creative team smoke up and come up with a story about how this equipment functioned, which was far from any type of reality. Their claims were that the way the sound frequencies travel, meaning you'll be the listener and then we have the speakers, and that the frequencies travel from the speakers to the listener's ear at a different rate. My understanding, probably invert this for me being a big goof and being wrong, would be that the higher frequencies traveling at a higher frequency would travel faster than the low frequencies. So these highs are hitting our ears first and then the lows, and this causes some non-linear post-destructive phase cancellation frequency damping, or it sounds like shit. So according to these manufacturers, what this device was doing was delaying the high frequencies just a little bit, and then everything is hitting your ears at the same time and sounds just like if you were to cup your ears and put the speakers right up on you. So that's similar to the effect of turning this BBE sonic maximizer circuit onto one of your mixes would be cupping your ears and getting right up on the drivers. And that is kind of like the effect. It really does open up that crystal clear sharpness. And for me, depending on the setup, I might even want to turn the treble down a bit after I've engaged that, where previously I would have the treble cranked, and I'm like, man, it's still a little dull. With the BBE chip, it's like, whoa, that's a bit much. I've got to tame that a little, and then therefore I've got some headroom to play with on my high end. So this is, it's highly recommended. And the cool thing about it is there is no analog to digital conversion. Eventually, these devices went from being large rental or lease only rack mount units down to a pedal, which was housed in a Hammond 1590B enclosure, which is somewhere around 110 millimeters by 84 millimeter. It's about box about that big. And a couple years after that, they shrunk it down to a 1590A, which is like very small. Have you ever seen the budget small guitar pedals sold by China? They're about like that. A little thicker, like the red going all the way down to here. They're like about that big. So that was called the BBE Sonic Stomp. And I believe it's the same thing. Look, I had a rhythm guitar player in a band I played in. We both had home studios. He owned a PA. And he had a Sonic Maximizer rack mount. And later on, I remember the pedals coming out, and if you had a large pedal board and you didn't have good buffering, so your signal was attenuated in the high end, this did work well. But using gain devices and distortions, not so much. It was good for clean tone. Anyway, right now on eBay China, you can see quite a few variations of these small circuits that are very affordable, which have the BBE NJM 2150, which is a 14 pin. Don't sue me if it's 16, but it's an integrated circuit chip. So it started out as a rack mount device, then it went into a pedal, then it went into a tiny pedal, and now it's on a tiny chip. So this goes pretty far to support those theories that no, there's no psychoacoustic high frequency delay compensated frequency phase induction delays going on. This is just an EQ. It's just some filtering is what it is. Now that being said, how does it sound? Well, to my ears, whenever I'm in a DIY capacity and I build something and it's lacking that crisp definition, this is my go-to problem solver. And man, I gotta tell you, I installed one last night in our music area. It's not a studio, although I do record an album every year in this area. This particular spot is for rehearsal. So it's a mixer, some headphone amp gear, then there's an MP3 unit that I built, an MP3 decoder board, and that comes out on a headphone jack cable at 1/8 inch or 3.5 millimeter. And so last night I cut in one of these BBE Sonic Maximizer boards on that MP3. So this circuit, the sound comes out of the MP3 unit, it goes into this BBE chip board, which was like $3 or $5. And it runs off the same powering. It's running off of 5 volts, not a lot of voltage. And then the output goes to the mixer. Now, the thing about our mixer is it's a monoprice plastic 8-channel board that runs off a 12 volt DC. I got it used for $40. And the first 2 channels have preamps. The last 2 channels are stereo pairs on single knobs, which is great if you do have stereo signal, because the alternative would be to have 2 knobs and you've got to set those exactly right every time you adjust the volume, or one ear will be louder than the other. So the advantage of the last 2 channels is you got 1 knob operation, but you may have to turn it all the way up to 10 to match something on the preamp channels, depending on where you set your gain. But I'd rather have stuff set at below noon, below that midpoint or at the midpoint. So I installed the BBE board, and the cymbals are a little hot. I had to turn the treble down a little bit, which is nice. I don't want my treble knob at 10. So this is a good problem solving. Although it didn't raise the gain up, it gave me more of a smile EQ curve, which that's what sounds good to my ears, is when I set the EQ like a smile. Not a whoop where you're like scooping out all the mids. Keeping the mids untouched and just boosting a little bit of highs and a little bit of lows. That's what I like. And that's the effect of this thing. Without having a whole bulky EQ, you can just install the circuit. And it has a stereo in, a stereo out, then there's a power, and then there'll be a 3 pins with a jumper on them. And you can pull that jumper off and move it over to the other 2 pins, and that will bypass the unit, which tells me you remove the jumper, solder 3 wires onto there, hook those up to an SPDT toggle switch, and then you put that on the front panel, and you have a engage or bypass for your sonic maximizer circuit. Now they sell all types of these. There's the cheapest one, just comes with the input, the output, the power, and the bypass. Then they have some where you can engage, bypass and engage the boost just on the bass and the boost just on the treble. Then they've got a board that comes with an equalizer, a 3-band EQ with a master volume control, and that board has a pair of preamp chips on it. NE5532. Now, if you've been paying attention and you've been watching, you'll know I am of the strong opinion from experience that anytime I order any of these boards from China and they include an NE5532 op amp, what will arrive says NE5532 on it, but when you actually take a look at it and do some testing, it's not an NE5532. It's a really cheap medium performance op amp, where the NE5532 is a high perf, it's a low noise op amp, and it sounds good. They really do sound good. I've compared them up against the Burr Brown. The OP2134 is the only one that I've compared it with. But for the price difference of paying like $7 a chip versus 59 cents, I gotta tell you the NE5532 sounds fantastic. So this being said, is anytime we order anything from China with these op amps in there, you just gotta be aware and order some of those chips, but don't order them from eBay, because what you'll get will be fakes. So should we pop over and take a look? I've got some links pulled up here. This is the data sheet for the chip, NJM 2150. Now this is one chip. I'm not sure if there's another one. We'll see. I think there's another chip that does a similar thing. So it's a sound enhancement audio processor which regenerates high definitive and nearly real clearness sound. It includes the BBE on-off switch, 2 grade boost switches in low and high band, 2.5 or 5.5 dB boost for the low band, and a 4.5 dB or 7.5 dB boost in the high band. Now, this chip includes that, but they're not, the boards that you buy will not always be wired for that. The cheaper the board, the less features you get. So this is suitable for TV, audio-visual receiver, CD, radio cassette, speaker system, car audio, and others. And MP3, this is what I would recommend. If you're playing around and doing do-it-yourself audio stuff where you're building MP3 decoder board with an amp and some speakers or a headphone amp, this is the missing link. You definitely want to have one of these BBE chips, and there's different ways to do it. Like, you can get your EQ board and then install this before the EQ and have the switching set up so you can turn the BBE on and then low or high level of low frequency boost, low or high level of high frequency boost. That's really cool because you can sculpt it. Then they have an EQ board that comes with the 3-band EQ and the BBE built into it. And I have one of those coming. So that is going to be the process of eliminating the EQ that I'm running right now, which does not have, it's just a 3-band EQ. So I will pull that one out of there, and then I'll have a spare EQ laying around for any, temporary or permanent installation. Do a temp test, don't forget your EQ. So it is a 20-pin IC, and the voltage, it's rated at 15 volts. I've seen it rated up to 20, and I think what that means is it can probably take 20 volts, but it can't take 24. 20, I would not put more than 15 volts through it, to be honest. Sometimes these manufacturers will give you that little bit of headroom in the specs, which I like when they do that, but it sure would have been nice if this thing would have been taking 36 volts, because a lot of this other audio equipment that I've been slapping together, I'm running a couple of 24 volt 500 milliamp power supplies for the EQ and the headphone amp. So the idea of all of a sudden having to get a 15 volt or a 12.5 volt power supply is not so appealing. So here's the one, and again, these are not the best pricing. I think you can get this same board for 13 shipped from eBay. But you see this one here has a 3-band EQ. There's the BBE chip, and here's the jumper to disable it. You've got your choice of 3.5 mil or just these connector audio inputs and outputs. The toggle or the power switch is on the back. This is some sort of a TS 7809. Is that what that says? So yeah, basically what that's doing, that's a volt, it's a 9 volt voltage regulator. So you might be putting 16, 15 volts into this thing. It's knocking that down to 9 volts. But this is what I would recommend. If you're doing an audio project, it's really not that much money considering everything you get. That it's got the BBE chip with the bypass, and then there's a 3-band EQ. The thing about these two preamp chips here is what you're seeing there is an authentic chip, more than likely. It kind of looks like Texas Instruments. But what you're going to receive is going to be a fake. So you would need to replace those chips. And they pop right out. As far as, is it going to sound terrible? No, it'll sound a little better with the actual chip. Now this is what I installed last night, which was perfect because I don't want to have any switching. I don't want to mess with it. It's going to be always on. I could put a toggle switch on this to defeat it, but if I feel like defeating it, I'll open the unit up, I'll pull this out with a needle nose pliers and move it over. So this was input and output, and then the VCC voltage in. Here's the Japan Radio Corporation integrated circuit chip, the BBE 2150AD. And this will work just fine if you want a set it and forget it type application. And you will thank me later because it's going to sound a lot better when you install this on your audio line. Here's one. You'll see it listed at 12 to 24, and there's no voltage regulator. So I'm guessing if you bought this and you hit it with 24 volts, magic smoke would be released. If you scroll down, excuse me, I've got a cough drop. The working voltage here says 9 to 18 volts. And then here's how it's working. You can bypass the BBE with this toggle or jumper configuration. And then these numbers are wrong. They've got these dBs that are actually incorrect. And then they didn't even bother faking them. They just put high level, low level. So this is showing here how you could what amp is that? Connect to amplifier. These are probably 2020 or 2050. And this is setting your gain for your input. These trimmer pots are more than likely your input gain. So yeah, this IC chip is shown so much larger than I don't know if you look, these connectors are the same connectors. This connector is the same connector as that. So when I say that the images are out of perspective, like these resistors are the same size resistors. So yeah, I wasn't kidding about that. Petey's a goof. Never listen to Petey. Always blaming his shortcomings on others. He's here to try to set the world on fire with his guitar. He's so proud of himself. You see here, this is some kind of a voltage converter. Whenever you see that right next to the power input, that means you can run it off AC or DC. And don't fret, if you see that AC or DC, that means the polarity doesn't matter with DC. You can flip-floppity, flip-flop to your heart's content. And what comes out of this thing is what matters. And it, like I said, it does not matter. When you're doing AC-DC, that means disregard any polarity markings. Because more than likely, there won't be any polarity markings. So this one, it looks like it has switching instead of jumpers for the bypass and then frequency switching. Kind of a neat idea. This one here is the same board as the one that I purchased. Although this one looks like it has AC or DC because it's got that power converter. And I'm not sure if the one that I bought is like that. Let's take a look. No, the one I bought has the 7809. So this is DC only. But getting back to the point here, this one, it's very similar to the board that I purchased. It's got a pair of op amps that you would replace. And then the potentiometers are detachable. Separate potentiometer version. So that's they call it JRC 2150 BBE or BBE 2150. And so that's the difference in the chip description. It really isn't. It's the same chip. And like I said, this is the board I've got coming. I've got a 5090 double X chassis that I'm going to mount this into. I need the extra room on the sides to put in some switching because I'm going to have the bypass for the BBE and then a power switch with, I think I'm going to have LEDs for both. I'll use bipolar LED, tap off the power on the bottom of the, or however I do it. I probably will remove this and just solder some wires in and use an external style connector for the power. And then tap off the bottom of this as a solder point and run some wires over here and piggyback it through on the DT, half of the switching, and use one side of the switch to turn the power on to go from the jack over to here, and the other one taking the hot side of the power to an LED. And same thing, one side of a DT over here to toggle the bypass for the chip, and the other side for an LED, which will sit probably right on top of the chip or the switch, which I've never done that before. I like using these paddle switches. These it's a toggle, but it's a shorty, and the spade thing that sticks out, it's not just a little like the end of a ballpoint pen looking thing. It's more like a spade. It's a cool looking switch. So anyway, you guys, I know I've talked about these BBE chips before. I really like them. Like, I like that smile curve. I always got to have extra EQ, and I'm getting to be picky about my high frequency. Like, the setup I have now just sounds really good, and it was a long time coming to that, but I'm very satisfied with it. It never ends with this neighbor of mine, Speed Racer. So if you're doing audio projects, try out one of those BBE 2150 boards. You won't be disappointed. Now, we had put in I ordered a Donner noise gate. He does this constantly. For my wife's bass guitar pedal board. And we installed it. We went to test it out, and her tuner wasn't working. And when you would engage the noise gate, the bass sounded farty. So I started cursing. I was freaking out, and I didn't even think like, hey, dummy, something's up, you know? And it was the the batteries were low. This pedal board runs on 2 pairs of rechargeable batteries. So there's 1 and 1 and 1 and 1. There's 4 batteries. 2 of those batteries were at like 3.5 volts and the other 2 were 2.5. And those 2.5 volts crapped out. So for a minute there, I was all MFing and all breaking a sweat and flipping out, praying. And then it was just the batteries were low. And then when I turned the power switch on, I didn't see the MP3 board light up. So I took that all apart while looking in there. And then I put it back together and powered it up again, and it came right on. So maybe there's a delay. Maybe when you hit the switch, it takes a full second or 2 for the display to light up. I think that's what it is. But we tested that last night at about 11 p.m. And she wasn't happy because it was Sunday night. And I was like, let's do this tonight because we've done a lot of changes on our rig and we haven't tested it yet. And I don't want to, like typically if we're planning on doing a rehearsal and then that's going to turn into an hour of me fixing stuff first, you're going to have a considerably less rehearsal time. So that's something to consider, is keep your batteries charged. That's about all that cough drop I can handle. And always test the day before. Don't wait until the day to do your test and think everything that you cut in is going to fire right up, because sometimes Mr. Reverse Polarity will pay you a visit. Mr. Reverse Polarity, the hilarity of the polarity. That's him. Okay, you guys, take care of yourselves. If you have any kind of huggable pet, please give them a hug from Petey. Extra treat. Try to stay cool or warm, is it? I don't know. Chicago, we're running our air conditioner and our space heater in the same day. Take care of yourselves, most of all. Peace.